Wednesday. Now, in less than 4 months, Kenyans have been to the ballot twice, and the Supreme Court has delivered 2 rulings that will definitely go in the books of history as historic. And now President Uhuru Kenyatta, in less than a week, will be going for his second and final term in office as the country's commander-in-chief. But unlike in his first term, the president already has a plate full. The recently concluded election have left the country sharply divided amongst right in the middle. The opposition has already assured the president of a hard time ahead of his swearing in as they push for the people's assemblies. One of the president's tasks will be to reunite the country. But how? Is dialogue an option? What about the constitutional amendments? Welcome to our political point this morning, and to drive this discussion on what next for Kenya, I have in studio Professor Herman Manyora, a political analyst. We also have Professor Kagwanja, who is a political analyst, and last but not least, Henry Maina, who is the CEO of Article 19. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning, and welcome to studio. Now, I'll start with you, Henry, and the question being, would it be fair to say now that we are over a legal hurdle, which is the petitions that were before the Supreme Court, but we now have the huge task of maneuvering the political hurdle that has been in this country for a long time, to be fair?
No, I don't think it would be right. We've finished the legal challenges that were presented before the Supreme Court. But there are many legal questions that have not been resolved, even as we await the decision in another 20 days. We would discover that there are questions, the 14 questions that were raised by the Supreme Court. They may not have responded to all of them, or even responded to them at all, meaning that they would remain legal questions that ought to be fixed. But the larger part is a political question, which is a question I think every 5 years the country has refused to address or has thrown some token solutions at. I think the country is divided, and this is the first thing anyone needs to accept, that in most other polities, yes, elections are divisive, but they are divisive around issues. Ours, elections divide us around ethnic lines, and both the big 2 political sides have literally managed to polarize the country further, and they must equally take a measure into turning this around. But secondly, that yes, we're going to have a swearing-in process, but my take is that Kenyans must still be allowed to exercise their rights even as we get along. I think I want to begin by pointing out that institutions have highly been politicized. The starting institution that has been politicized is the National Police Service. It must be depoliticized. It must protect life and protect property with an equal measure. And every life that has been lost in the last 4 or 5 months must be accounted for, and those who are responsible held to account.
All right.
Otherwise, we would be just dressing.
We'll come back to the politicization of institutions and the fact that in Kenya we have laws and institutions, but somehow they don't seem to work. Let me come to you, Professor Manyora. And do you agree that we are, as a country, have refused, according to Maina's words, to address issues that possibly come up every 5 years? And given another 5 years, we possibly might even be here, if not worse.
Yeah, but even before that, the first question he asked was whether we have...
we are over the hurdle,
the hurdle of the legal question. I think our problem stopped being legal the moment Raila withdrew from the election. There never was going to be any legal means of solving our problem. So we've been faced with a political question from that moment. The political question, in my view, being a little broader than the legal, so you can incorporate the legal issues within that political problem. Again, it is true that if we are not careful, we seem to be confirming that every 5 years we engage in a ritual of sorts, and that it doesn't seem to be an opportunity for fair context. I wish to stop, but after telling you this, that in this country, what can set this country ablaze, on fire really, is elections. Every country has its own problem. The race problem in America is not something small. In the next 50 years, if they don't sort it out, the country could even burn. Even countries like Israel, there are divisions within the Jews themselves, those who came from Eastern Europe and those who came from the western side of Europe, who feel superior to the others. So every country has its own problem. Our problem here is election. I keep saying it's a simple thing, which we can sort out. But if we do not do that, we are setting ourselves not just for failure, but for destruction as a country.
All right, we'll come to, you say it's simple, and maybe one might ask the question, if it is that simple, why haven't we managed to tackle it? But let me come to Professor Kagwanja. Your thoughts on whether we are through with the legal hurdle, and the bigger question now is the political environment that we're in.
Let me start with my problem. The problem that I think is in this country, before you even talk about what you're asking, because you're now asking me a very contrived question. And I think this country needs to go back to school as a whole. The first thing is not even whether the election was fair or not fair. Journalists, political players, everybody will need to go back for a refresher course on what democracy is about. Because if you know what democracy is about, my brother would not ask me that question.
Why not?
Because elections are competition. They are competition between leaders. The election, those going to decide, the voter, are informed by the principle of individualism, one man, one vote. In this country, you begin to talk about, communities. Communities don't vote. Individuals vote. So at what point did the Ruos vote? At what point did the Mijikendas vote? At what point did the Kambas vote?
I'm sorry,
that's a problem.
How has that come in? Because my question here, dealing with the legal...
I'm answering your question because that's where you start now confounding our minds, and we answer the wrong questions. And I don't answer wrong questions. Everything in Kenya is legal because we are a democracy based on the rule of law. You cannot begin to dichotomize so-called political and legal. That is hair splitting. Everything political become legitimate because it is legal. That's all. Now, somebody standing and saying we are looking for a political solution to this, you are basically inciting us to sabotage our law. That's the point. Because if we do decide that we want to change the law, it is Parliament which is elected that will guide us on which process to go. Politicians can have caucuses and decide on these things in the back room, but it's not a public debate. Then you can bring it as a public debate the way Mutua has brought it out, that maybe we need to change this. But ultimately, the deciding plane will be the law. Now, this idea of political legitimacy, illegitimacy and legal legitimacy, I think it's not in the books. It is cooked in media houses and strategy rooms of political groups. That's the truth. And it is very, you can tell that I'm not happy because somebody is taking us for a ride. It cannot be politically correct and legally wrong. It cannot be legally right and politically wrong. That is now beginning to take us for a long ride.
All right.
So don't ask me that question about legal.
Professor Kagwanja needs, yes, I agree with Professor that people need to go to school.
Yes, we need to.
And perhaps he is the first one who needs to go to school.
Why?
And here is the reason. That democracy is not just a process of people taking a ballot paper.
I know that.
And
why do you think I don't know that?
The reason as to why I'm repeating this is when you begin to say that that's what democracy is all about. That voting,
not really.
Voting is an aspect of democracy.
I have a minute to say.
In and of itself is not democracy. That there are many aspects that come to this process of voting. And what people are pointing out, that our processes of voting, yes, they may meet a small minimum legal threshold. Because our laws are about minimum thresholds. And this country is yearning to go beyond the minimums. And that's why we continue even passing more laws. Because if the laws that we have were sufficient,
can I finish
then
my
we
point?
would all just live by that.
All right.
Can I finish my point? Yes.
Go on.
As far as our law is concerned, and I'm talking about the law of Kenya,
Yes.
which we have defined very clearly in the Constitution, to be a president in the Republic of Kenya, you need to meet certain thresholds, and they have spelled out within our Constitution. One, you must present yourself as a candidate. Two, so if you are not a candidate, you are not subject to election. That's the Constitution. Two, when you present yourself, in order to be declared a winner, you must have 51% plus one to be declared president. That is way above the majority. Okay? Two, you must win at least 24 counties and be declared with 25%. What is this exercise about? It's about seeking as much majority as you can get in our country so that we don't have a minority leader. Let me finish. So because it is important to look at that, then finally, if people are not happy with the process, then you have the Supreme Court. Now, until we invent something else other than what we have, you cannot come back and say, this is illegal, this is legitimate.
But what would bring about the invention of something else, what you're calling something else, is a political procedure.
Not necessarily. Yes, it's a political process.
And that's why we're saying that there is legal and there is political. And at the point where we are as a country, we have gone through the legal, which is now going through what the process that you're talking about. But we still, do you agree that we have a part of the country that is not happy with the way things are?
But that is
regardless of the fact that we've gone through the legal process.
Waiga, that is the problem. Because democracy is based on a cardinal principle. That it is based on the principle of a game where there will be losers and winners. And the winners will accept victory with grace, and the losers will accept loss with grace.
All right.
Now, if you have people who can never accept loss, they can only be rigged out, then you cannot have democracy in this country.
All right.
Even in the coming 5 years, if the loser will not accept that he has lost gracefully and allow the country to move on, and begin to politicize his numbers. Oh, I want 5 million people. I have 5 million people supporters. Hillary Clinton in the U.S. won over the current leader by over 3 million people. She's not in the streets. She's not organizing people's assemblies.
Allow me to bring in Professor Manyora here. And Professor, your thoughts on that? Are we purely a legal state where,
You see, Mike, this is a simple thing. When people are together at a chama, merry-go-round, but now we are talking about a country, they sit down and agree how we are going to stay together and operate together, and, there are things we shall be doing together. Then you put down rules. How do we, if you come late for chama, 50 shillings, this kind of thing. So as a country, when you are together in a country, you put down rules and laws and sometimes in a written document called a constitution. So these laws are able to be used for orderly conduct in that society. Now, the process of putting down these rules and ensuring that they are followed and so on and so forth is what really politics is about. So politics is superior. So when we say that the country has gone beyond the legal thing, we are simply saying we have used our laws to conduct an election. Certain aspects of that election have been contested. A determination has been made in the Supreme Court. If we were to strictly follow the law, the president is being sworn in and we should next have elections in 2022 or thereabouts. However, like you correctly put it, this has been contested in a manner never before contested. In other words, for the first time in this country, there is a significant portion of the country that is raising the issue of legitimacy. People in our country are saying they are not going to recognize the president. This is big. This is not a joke. This is not a legal issue. This is big. This has destroyed countries. The moment you have a section of a country saying they do not recognize the properly instituted government, then you have a big problem on your hands. Now, I say this is a small problem because, like Professor says, you win and become president through a political contest, and there are rules about it. The other side is saying, you people are running this thing in a manner nobody can win fair. There can never be a time when through this process you can be president of this country. You can never win because the goalpost will always be changed. We have established an umpire, the IEBC. But then the IEBC, this side is complaining, is joined at the hip with the government. So that referee cannot preside over a match that is free and fair.
Professor Manyora, you've said it twice that it is simple.
It is simple.
Why have we not sorted it out if it is that simple?
Everybody argues with me. Any time I say this is simple, I am saying what Kenya has is akin to a student who has a leaked exam. You are sitting an exam tomorrow, it is leaked. We know we are going to destroy this country. We know we are going to destroy this country, not because we are fighting over resources like other countries or religious differences that are so deep-seated, but because we refuse to have just the good manners of having a good election.
So what our solution is just good manners?
Good manners so that we have good elections, fair elections, and we move on as a country.
Into the definition.
Don't you see how simple it is?
Because maybe good manners for one home are different for another home.
No, they are universally accepted.
All right. Henry, do you agree that it's a simple solution that we're simply refusing to sort out?
It's not a simple problem. I think it's a very complex problem. And as a country, we glossed over it. And I want us to begin understanding that it's not the first time in this country that questions of illegitimacy have come up. These questions came out about Moi after he was declared the winner in 1992. They came up after Moi was declared in 1997. And as a good follower of that argument, I know that Professor Kagwanja, in many of his writings, then talked about the illegitimacy of President Moi. Now he seems to totally want to abandon.
Can you discuss your point without me?
Abandon that argument and begin to think it is a new concept that has been bandied around by media or political players. So the point is that in any polity, there would be questions of legality and legitimacy. The questions of legitimacy are about how do you carry as many people in that polity as possible. And they would be asked at a national level, they will be asked at a county level, they will be asked at a constituency level and at a ward level. Because we know that there are leaders, for instance, in certain wards, who only went to campaign in 3 or 4 villages, which gave them the numbers they needed and didn't care about the others. And there are questions of legitimacy there, even though they meet the minimum legal thresholds to be declared leaders. So this question of legitimacy must not be unduly downplayed. And in between elections, that's the time when this issue is discussed, laws are reviewed to ensure that legality and legitimacy nearly mirror each other. Because when they do, you have a perfect union. When they don't, then you have a small cabal of leaders who meet the legal threshold, dragging over everyone. Is that? An example I've talked about, Professor Manyora talks about this being a simple issue. The question of how we pick the umpire, the commissioners in IEBC, has dogged this country from 1992. Previously, we had one election officer in the office of the president. That went on into a commission that was solely appointed by the president. Then we had a commission that had nominees from different political parties, depending on their strength. We went back in 2007 to a commission that was purely appointed by the president. We've gone round to one that is appropriated by the big two with these results. Is there a problem even after, say, the chair of IBC told us that my commission is partisan. One of the things people have argued, and I'm one of those who hold that view, we need to reduce the number of commissioners so that this idea that you have 8 or 9, so that the old provinces or the big ethnic groups contest on filling those positions is lessened. Have 3 people, begin to think about reforms on IBC, because as it is as an institution, I had people yesterday saying every election must have challenges. We necessarily can't deliver a perfect election. But the challenges that exist in the Kenyan election, I think to that extent I agree with Mwalimu Manyora that some of the mistakes we've made are simple and can be rectified.
Okay.
But we repeat them every time and then
again.
Without
Let me come to you, Professor Kagwanja, and let's talk solutions for the sake of managing time. What do you foresee as a solution? Now that you say that our problem is not per se political, and we are living in a state which is governed by laws and regulations, which for some reason they seem to work, but still leave others not satisfied. What do you propose as a solution for our country?
Let me first of all say this, that if you ever went to a classroom, whether it's an economic class or a political class or a sociology class, and you were treated to the 101 course of philosophy that undermines all this discipline. One person that comes up is a British called Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes would talk about the state of nature. Another person who comes up is John Locke, who talks about the state of nature. But they have 2 views of the state of nature. That is, mankind before the emergence of the law or the rule of law. How are they? For Thomas Hobbes, it was a brutal process. People were killing each other left, right, and center. For John Locke, it was a state of happiness where their freedoms were not restrained. Okay? And from those 2, I can answer your question straight. It depends on where you are coming from. If you're coming from Thomas Hobbes, the law is not important. I mean, the law is extremely important. If you're coming from John Locke, where there should be no law, then you can have people's assemblies, you can have to the streets and all that, because that is happiness. I mean, we are talking about serious philosophical questions. You know, you can have everything with unrestricted, unhindered, and unimpeded. Now, what do we need in Kenya? First, we need losers to accept that they have lost and accept gracefully. If you feel strongly that you have not lost, then you take recourse to the court. That is what we have established as our own political culture. 3, leaders across the country must recognize that individuals vote, communities don't vote. And therefore, talking about us as being marginalized or those as being marginalized is what we are calling politicization. In fact, what we are doing is we are weaponizing tribes, using tribes as a weapon to intimidate others and to delegitimize what our law has legitimized. So some of our leaders have become adept. They have become experts in turning tribes into weapons. And tribes have naively accepted to be turned into weapons. And that weaponization of tribal communities at the expense of the principle of democracy, where it is one man, one woman, one vote, then that is where our problems begin. Moving forward, it is possible and it is necessary to have a political discourse. But the political discussion must not be based on threat, that we have a crisis, we have this, because you whip a community into a frenzy where we begin now to feel that we are swarmed by this big crisis, when our constitution is intact. Our constitution has not been overthrown by anybody. And where you condone somebody trying to sabotage the constitution and you start to sanitize it as, resistance, protest, and all that, which is basically sabotaging the constitution, I think we need to respect the rule of law. We need to commit ourselves to the rule of law irrespective. When you are jailed Every prisoner in our jails believe they are innocent, don't they? Every prisoner in our jails they believe they are innocent. And they push for review of their cases, repeal, and some will even say that I am here because I did not have resources to get a good lawyer for myself. But as a community and as a country, we have accepted that if you are proved by our courts that you are guilty, your freedom as a human being no longer exists the way you'd want it to be. You go behind bars. Why is it that we are not able to allow ourselves to the same principle, that the court decide it is final? Why do people hang around talking about, oh, political legitimacy and so on, where legitimacy, whether you are coming from Thomas Hobbes or you are coming from John Locke, is bestowed upon us by our law?
All right, let me come to you, Professor Manyora. One man, one vote. It is not communities that vote, but individuals. But politicians have, according to Professor Kagwanja, used this to balkanize. And somehow, Kenyans seem to fall for it. Do you agree with that?
You could say yes, but really that is not important. I want to go just before I address your question. You see, first using his own example, analogy of prisons. Society has prisons and have laws. It is assumed, Professor Kagwanja, that those we will send to jail compared to those who shall not send to jail are really insignificant. So you can't have jails that can hold all Kenyans. So the moment you are law, and the moment you are doing things in such a way, you are about to send half of the country to jail, then there's something wrong with your law. You need to rethink that law. Now, before again I answer your question, because many people have not understood me, including my friend Maina here. When I say this is simple, Mike, how many voters are in India? An idea? Roughly?
Oh, they're quite a huge number compared to Kenya, maybe twice or three times.
What are you talking about?
Billion or something.
800 million voters with about 3 commissioners. So when I say conducting an election in this country ought to be a simple thing, I mean exactly that. But let me tell you where the problem is in this country. Even if today because we have a crisis, which I'm coming to before, because he's saying we don't have. Even if, as a way of solving this crisis, we say we are going for a fresh election. But now, let's go back to the IPPG day. Let Raila's side produce 4 commissioners, and Uhuru's side 4 commissioners, maybe with religious and other people giving us a what? Maybe a chairman, to make it 9. Do you know what will happen, Mike? The side of Raila, most likely, and even the Uhuru side, they will not care who they put there. In this country, the problem is, and it's a tragedy, we think just about anybody can do anything. You get it? Just about anybody can do anything. We don't know that for a time like that, you need the best men and women to do it. So that's why it looks complicated, because we think just about anybody can do it. Now, indeed, there is a crisis in this country. And if we try to run away from that, we are doing ourselves great disservice. Because if you have a country where half of the country is saying, we are not moving with you, wherever it is you are going, we are not with you, it's time for you to stop. You cannot be going again. So that's why I'm saying, if this had been a serious country, I'm sorry we are not serious people. The moment Raila withdrew from this election, it was time to stop and think, where are we going? It's a simple fact. It couldn't happen in a civilized country that one half, or a party that represents one half of the country, says you are not in this journey, and you continue. You are getting yourself into trouble.
All right, so let's talk solutions. Professor Manyora, what solutions do you have?
Again, it is simple. The solution is simple, that people need to sit down and talk. Granted, Uhuru is going to be sworn in, so you cannot be negotiating his presidency. That is where the problem is. That the other side will have to agree. You cannot sit on a table and negotiate Uhuru being president of this country. That will not work. So you need to agree that, well, you remain president, but anything else will be discussed. If we go that way, because NASA will come saying we don't recognize you as we discussed, assuming there's a point of discussion. They'll say, we don't recognize you. That will be wrong. They should say, we appreciate, for the time being you are the president, but let's sit down and negotiate But anything will be put on the table, including a new, fresh election will be on the table and how to conduct it. And the nitty details.
Yes, sir.
That will be okay with me.
This is the problem I am talking about. And if it were not for my friend Manyora, we have a cup of tea together. And sometimes when
occasionally,
we have lunch together, so I can't go too deep into him. The reality of what he is saying is that what I'm calling the anti-democratic culture, which is the main problem of this country. Anti-democratic culture. Now, why I said we need to go back to school, and I don't want to be seen by Maina and others as being arrogant. I'm very serious about this. I'm not being arrogant. We are having two principles that are in a collision course in this country. The first principle is that of peace building. And peace building is what we embraced after the 2007-2008 violence. And it has its own arsenals and instruments of dealing with it. Cohesion, talk, mediation, dialogue, and it has its own already made solutions, which is power sharing in order to broker the country into a new constitution and then to democracy. It's a roadmap which was charted by South Africa through what they call the CODESA process. It's very clear. The second is democracy itself, which comes at the end of the peace building. The problem we have in this country is that some people are still stuck in 2007, 2008. They have not moved on. The country moved. We got a new constitution. We went on and set up institutions, including the Electoral Commission. It might not be the best election commission in the body, but I do know that it is better than the American Electoral Commission, because the American Electoral Commission is based in a government department. Ours, at least, democratically has some independence. Now, so we set institutions. They are not the best. You heard what Jubilee talked about the Supreme Court in August 8. You've heard what NASA has talked about the Supreme Court in this. Nothing is perfect. We have no angels. But we need to move on as a country and accept the principle of democracy. The principle of democracy is not about sitting down and telling the president, except you, everything below you is negotiable. According to who? The Constitution is the one that guides us. Now, I agree with what he is saying, that perhaps we need a dialogue, but not a dialogue on our institutions. It is dialogue on how to live together as a people, how to make people feel that there is justice, individuals. And as you have seen, the people who went to court to challenge the election were not mobs. They were individuals, because our Constitution allows every individual as a corrective of that sovereign to express their view. So the President Kenyatta was not challenged by any presidential candidate. He was challenged by citizens. And the court ruled that you citizens, on this account, you are wrong. On the other side, he was challenged by a political contender, Raila Odinga. And the court said, okay, I don't want to talk about the results, but as far as the processes are concerned, we are not satisfied as a court. And then they nullified the election. Okay. What did Uhuru do? President Kenyatta stood up and said, I don't agree with the ruling of the court, but I agree wholesale with our Constitution and its provisions, and therefore I accept the verdict.
All right.
So we need to recommit ourselves. That is a single word. We need to recommit ourselves to the spirit of democracy, and democracy is not about mobs. Democracy is not about revolutions. Democracy is not about secessions. Democracy is not about weaponizing ethnic groups for political gains.
Henry, let me come to you just before we take a break. Do you agree that maybe our answers purely lie in the Constitution? If we were to embrace the Constitution, and by embracing the Constitution, embrace democracy, by virtue of the fact that democracy, the Constitution has a predetermined, predictable path that it gives us.
Yes, to that extent, I think I agree with Professor Kagwanja, and I want to begin by telling him that it is a constitutional right of Kenyans to protest. So any Kenyan who shows dissent is still exercising a democratic right. So this argument or this narrative that to be democratic is not to protest.
No, that's not the point.
Is a narrative that is wrong and must be debunked as fast. That people agree or disagree on issues. And when they do that, it's democratic. So that you're not measured to be democratic just because you agree and sit by docile. That active disagreement. I go to court, I write about it, I protest about a decision that I think is wrong, and my constitution allows me to do that. Whether I'm dissenting a political action or any other, the constitution allows me to do that. So one, we must accept that if we've chosen rule of law and constitution, then it must abide for everyone.
Allow me to pause you because we need to take a short break here and release KTN Home. For those of us watching on KTN Home, we're going to release you and say goodbye. But those of us on KTN News, we continue with this conversation right here. And we'll take a short break. When we come back, we continue and possibly, hopefully, wind up and find out what is the solution that Kenya needs. It may not be a solution that can be given in one program. It may not be a solution that can be given in one paragraph, but we need to begin that journey to ensuring that Kenya remains one nation. Do stay with us right here on KTN News. We'll be right back.